Open standards are standards that are open in their development, open in their implementation, and open in their use. They're open in development means that participation should be available to all interested parties, and that it should not be predicated upon any membership in an organization, predicated upon technical credentials or financial backing of a government. And membership fees should not serve as an economic barrier to public participation. And openness in development also means due process, meaning that all interested parties and all interests should be discussed, and agreements found without undue influence of any particular organization or person. And any dissent, I believe, should be made available in public record. And also on that slide, I say that consensus, I think everyone understands what consensus means, that all interests should be discussed and agreements found without undue influence. So there should be a structure for enforcing violations and for appeals of decisions. Those are some examples of openness in development. What do I mean by openness in implementation? Openness in implementation means that all of the completed standard specifications are made available to the general public, so that you don't have to be a member to access them. They should be publicly available for scrutiny and for access. And especially that the standards are made available either preferably royalty-free, or at least that the holders of the intellectual property rights make them available for licensing on a reasonable and non-discriminatory basis. And also based on independently defined costs. And openness in use means that users will not have compatibility problems, like the cases that I described, because of the software that they use or the standards that are implemented in their software. And it especially means user choice, that any individual or institution should have user choice of the applications they're using to access the internet. So I think that some of these descriptions really do emanate from the Internet Governance Forum's principle of openness. And this principle and openness and standards development not only provides technical interoperability, but I think they also have very important economic and political implications, and I'd like to just describe a couple of those. From an economic standpoint, open standards have market effects. They level the playing field, I think, as just traditional economic theory would imply, by enabling full competition and therefore innovation among different parties. And economically, it provides user choice, and one would assume that increased competition, and we have seen this, produces greater choice and also reduces costs of products. And the openness and standards that I described also has network effects, just simply by the nature of interoperability, where interoperability can increase the value of information of any one citizen because information is available to more citizens. So network effects, user choice, market effects, and what I'm really interested in, though, are the political implications of open standards. We often think about standards as neutral technological formulations, but really standards make policy decisions. They have consequences. They mediate tensions between prevailing social issues, such as the balance of law enforcement versus individual privacy. They balance things such as access to knowledge or access to information and digital rights. So the public interest really can be embodied in technical protocols. So it brings up the question of how can the public interest, and especially the interests of developing countries, be embodied in these protocols? So that's a big question, and that's one of the reasons why I think the standards bodies that have had this democratic participation and open to the public have been so successful. And another political implication has to do with trade policy, where we have seen some cases of a proprietary standard being used by a national government as a barrier to trade, or to institute some kind of a trade policy. So there's that issue, and on the other side of that, the embracing of open standards can sometimes provide an opportunity for nations to become more competitive in the global ICT marketplace. So there are economic opportunities as well as economic caveats. And then I think political issue that is most interesting to me is just the embodiment of democratic values, where governments can be interested in adhering to open protocols, and I think citizens are interested in them because they reflect democratic values of equal user access to information, so access to knowledge, individual civil liberties, and general feelings of government openness and transparency. And that one is very interesting to me right now because here we are in the birthplace of democracy in Athens, and I'm in a short amount of time going to get on a plane and head back to the United States and vote in an election. That's very important on Tuesday. And I believe that I'm going to be using an electronic voting machine. I know that this is not related to the internet, but it just does, it's just an example of how standards can embody or challenge democratic values. I and a lot of people are concerned about whether our vote will count because there isn't any kind of a paper trail in electronic voting. And even in a very, very important issue that's salient to this discussion is that there is no transparency and no standards for the tabulation specifications that underlie these different voting mechanisms. So throughout democracy, we have had a case where votes have been counted in a room with transparency and people looking at it and seeing the specifications. And I think that that transparency is important, not just in an obvious case like electronic voting, but in these other standards that do embody the public interest.